Millionaires on the Run. Alex Jones and the GCN Radio Network.
I began to get into iodine a few years ago because it was helping me and my family so much get healthy and detoxify. Most people know that iodine deficiency has been a crisis around the world. Iodine is key to so many of the body's functions, especially the thyroid. I discovered a product being developed by Dr. Group. You now know it as Survival Shield True Nascent Iodine that your body can really absorb. Then, about a year ago, he said, listen, if you think this is powerful, I'm going to come out with rare earth, deep earth crystals. And the results that I personally have had have been life-changing. Nobody else has got iodine based on these pure crystals, ladies and gentlemen. This is innovating, and the best part is it helps fund Infowars.com, the radio show, the TV show, the whole media operation promoting true libertarian ideas. For a limited time, experience the ancient power of Survival Shield X2. Take advantage of this unprecedented 30% off Super Detox Special at InfoWarsLife.com.
Hi, I'm Dr. Edward Group. It took me 20 years of searching the globe to find the deposit of the highest purity iodine available. The new Survival Shield X2 is mined from 7,000 to 10,000 feet below the earth in pristine, environmentally clean conditions. The iodine crystals we use are extracted from an ancient 300 million plus year old deposit deep in the earth. It's the strongest nascent iodine on the market today. It delivers 650 micrograms per drop. Experience the new formula. Experience the ancient purity. Shield your family. Survival Shield X2. Available now at InfoWarsLife.com.
X2 from InfoWarsLife.com or call toll-free 888-253-3139. From the water table to our soils to the atmosphere itself, our world is becoming more and more toxic each and every day. But it's not just the air outside that's toxic. Indoor air has been shown to have 2 to 5 times higher concentrations of pollutants than even outdoor air. And most Americans spend 90% of their time inside using toxic chemicals within their homes. There are more than 42 million smokers in the United States. Well over 1,000 types of mold and mildew linked to numerous conditions. And don't forget the fact that 6 million Americans live with pets they're allergic to as well. When I began to research these statistics, it was clear to me it was time to start cleansing my lungs in order to combat the toxic environment that we cannot escape, but that we can fight back against. Made with organic and wild cultivated herbs and manufactured in the USA, the new InfoWars Life Lung Cleanse is here in a convenient spray bottle that can be brought with you throughout any toxic environment. Now available exclusively at InfoWarsLife.com or by calling toll-free 888-253-3139.
Defending the Republic from enemies, foreign and domestic. It's Alex Jones.
Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight in Austin, and I'm joined now by Paul Joseph Watson in the UK. We want to talk about some of the articles that he put up today. Just before the break, I gave you the headline, Law Enforcement Firm, Nobody Will Complain About Militarized Police When ISIS Attacks. That's a tweet they put out. In other words, instead of saying, you know, maybe we went too far, maybe we need to examine what we do when we are killing innocent people, when we're throwing grenades into babies' cribs. Instead, he says, hey, you're going to want us when the terrorists come. And Paul, I ask, when it's the government's policy to terrorize us and intimidate us with things like SWAT raids and militarized vehicles, how do we tell these guys from the terrorists? I mean, they both wear masks. They seem to operate in the same way.
It's becoming increasingly difficult, isn't it, David?
Yeah.
I mean, this arrives in the context of this big ACLU report investigation, which you mentioned before the break, which basically describes the United States as a war zone with the increase in these SWAT team raids. Injuries and deaths since 2010 are through the roof. You mentioned before the break, 80,000 SWAT raids per year now. That's actually up from 45,000 in 2005. So in just the course of the last 8 years, that figure has almost doubled. So now you've got this story today, which is out of a company that provides video training programs for law enforcement. I believe it's run by ex-law enforcement officials. And basically, they reference infants like Boo Boo, who was the 18-month toddler, critically injured, brain damage, still in intensive care after a SWAT team member threw a flashbang grenade into his crib during a raid near Atlanta recently. Of course, they also mention ISIS, which is the insurgent group in Iraq that's taken over key towns in Iraq, which, of course, members of which were trained by the US government in Jordan. That's seldom mentioned.
Exactly.
So in this Facebook post, they say, when this militarization of LEAs, law enforcement agencies, affects infants like Boo Boo, the public's going to be righteously outraged. But someday when ISIS comes a-calling, who will be complaining then? So as you said, they're basically saying that when the terrorists attack, this militarization of police will be necessary, will be needed, and in fact will be called for by the American people. So it's a completely outrageous comment in light of the fact that this poor toddler remains in intensive care, could die from his injuries after this disgraceful SWAT team attack. And they link to the Guardian article about this big ACLU report about how the SWAT teams, the police, are becoming increasingly militarized. And they basically just dismiss it as necessary in light of ISIS, which is a group that the US government, the Obama administration, was partly responsible for creating through their support of jihadists in Syria.
Yeah, exactly. And like this other article that we have from Mikhail Phelan, you've got a regional SWAT team says we're not a public agency. We don't need to respond to requests for information from the ACLU. I mean, you know, both the SWAT team there as well as ISIS, you know, they're both trained by the government, equipped by our government, and they both claim that they don't work for our government, and yet they're using these kind of terrorist tactics. You know, you mentioned, Paul, that this is an organization that tweeted this in the line of duty that trains people. And that's really where the problem is coming from. It's coming from the people who train them, and they're being trained by Homeland Security to have these kinds of rules of engagement, to look at America as a war zone. You know, out in New Mexico, when everybody saw that homeless man shot for illegal camping and was outraged, they don't really care about that. The police in New Mexico, they have a curriculum in New Mexico, in the state academy for the police, a shoot first curriculum. They had an instructor who resigned because he refused to teach that kind of curriculum. And so they look at this as a war zone, and that should make us all the more afraid of the fact that they justify these assassinations abroad with drones, saying that, well, it's a war zone. We need to understand that they see the entire world as a war zone. So when they put things like the NDAA, where they say the military can indefinitely detain people, they can transport them for torture, whatever, when they put that in and say, well, that's when it's a war zone, we need to understand that they recognize America now as a war zone.
Precisely, because this flashbang tactic, that is a military tactic that was used against insurgents in Afghanistan and Iraq. It's just like the armored vehicles have been brought home to be used against the American people. That military tactic is now being used against the American people. And in the Guardian article, there are several other examples of where children have been injured and even killed by these flashbang grenade attacks, as it were. So they're using military tactics that were used against terrorists previously. There are even, for example, a mayor in Illinois called out a SWAT team to search the house of someone who had poked fun at him on a Twitter account. So they're using SWAT teams as their little private armies to go after people who merely express dissent. And as he said, they're concerned about transparency. That's why they don't want to release any more details, because there's growing outrage about this. And another new factor is now we've got pro-police state Facebook pages which solely exist to scoff at real cases of police brutality in an attempt to get these anti-police brutality Facebook pages shut down. So just like, you know, governments hire people to troll websites, to troll comment sections, now there are entire Facebook cliques, groups that go after people who are complaining about police brutality. So again, it shows the desperate attempt to cover up this police brutality as its endemic spread begins to dominate social media, as more people are becoming aware of it.
It's an information war, isn't it? And we have to educate the public as to what's going on. That's why I talked to Cheryl Chumley yesterday about her book, Police State USA. People don't understand what's going on, and so that's what you're talking about. There's a war, and they're pushing back with, as you point out, pro-police state Facebook pages and social media, and we know that they hire government trolls to troll our website, to troll other places, to push back on comments against that. But one of the things that I think we really need to stress to people is how this is really being done by the military-industrial complex. The same people that have given us unending wars since the end of World War II for profit are now bringing those wars home. They've made a lot of money out of the war on drugs. They want a war on terrorism here domestically. They sell a lot of equipment to these police departments, to the federal government, which then donates them to the police departments, because it's the Homeland Security that is driving all this change in the police, that's militarizing the police and centralizing control. But we really need to look at all of these quote-unquote non-lethal techniques that they're using against everybody. As you pointed out, you know, the flashbang grenades, the beanbag shotguns that they just killed a World War II vet that was in his 90s with, tasers, where they're tasering people and people are getting permanently brain damage when they hit the ground or die from that, in many cases from a heart attack or from the fall that they have. These non-lethal things that are being sold by the military-industrial complex to police departments are not non-lethal, and they've got a lot more in the pipeline, as you pointed out in recent weeks. I think it was you that had the article about the pepper spraying drone.
Yeah, that was my brother. Yeah. They're building an arsenal. I mean, you know, the guy who trained Fallujah forces, Iraqi soldiers, said that Homeland Security is building a domestic army. That was during his testimony against New Hampshire's purchase of one of these Bearcat armored vehicles. And in fact, the police chief, in justifying the purchase of that vehicle, wrote in his application that it was needed to deal with the threat posed by libertarians and Occupy activists. So the police in that state brazenly admitted that this was to deal with political dissidents. So it's, as he said, 7% used against barricaded, potentially violent criminals in the home. That's a minority. The real purpose is to terrify people, to intimidate them. And in fact, there's another story which is coming out after the show ends, which centers around Walton County Sheriff's Office. And like hundreds of other local police departments, they've got their hands on one of these MRAP armored vehicles for basically next to nothing, the cost to go and pick it up from the Department of Defense. And what's so ludicrous about this example is this county, Walton County, is considered so idyllic that it was used as the setting for the 1998 movie The Truman Show to illustrate an area so perfect and quaint that it appeared to be fake. So this is an area so perfect, virtually crime-free, it's described as, and yet the police have just purchased an armored vehicle that was used to hunt down insurgents in Iraq and Afghanistan. And basically the residents are completely freaking out. They're complaining on the Facebook pages. But again, it shows you they will purchase the most insane, high-tech, brutal technology and use it against towns and counties that are virtually crime-free, perfect, quaint areas, which shows you exactly the purpose. It's not to fight armed, dangerous criminals. It's to intimidate the American people.
And you know, the very definition of terrorism is when you use violence or the threat of violence to achieve political means. And that's what they're doing with these. They are deliberately terrorizing the public. And at the same time, you've got Hillary Clinton talking about how anybody that believes that the Second Amendment is an absolute right is terrorizing the public. No, they're terrorizing the public with their militarized police state. And they're intimidating people with that kind of rhetoric, calling them terrorists. We need to come up with a system where we can review the police. The police are really out of control, and in most cases, you know, you can vote for a sheriff and you can get a sheriff out of office, but the police chiefs are not elected. So it's very difficult for us to get a foot in the door to try to get some oversight. That's why I think the federal government has focused on the police departments to really militarize things. Before we run out of time, because I've just got you here for this half hour, I want to talk about this other article that went up today about this ex-CIA officer who says that open source revolution is about to overthrow the global oligarchy.
Yeah, this is basically a continuation of the theme we were talking about yesterday. It's an interview by The Guardian conducted with ex-CIA spy Robert David Steele. And it's a complex issue, so people need to read the article. But basically, he's saying that we're going to see a bottom-up, grassroots, voluntarist, network-style revolution, an open-source revolution, which will be enough to defeat the hierarchical, top-down, imposed control that we're currently laboring under. So the tools of revolution are already in our hands and are going to become more potent in terms of self-empowerment and escape